Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today our topic of discussion is the treatment of hypertension or antihypertensive drugs. As you know, hypertension is raised systolic or diastolic blood pressure as compared to normal values. We make the diagnosis and it is based on repeated, reproducible, two words, repeated, reproducible measurement of elevated blood pressure. It is not only single reading, but we make the reading twice or thrice, and then we label a patient as hypertension. When we know that the blood pressure is raised, that is going to affect, according to the severity, a rise in blood pressure. That is going to damage the blood vessels of the brain, heart and kidney. In the brain, it is going to cause in the form of stroke. In the heart, it can give you the symptoms of ischemic heart disease or congestive cardiac failure. While when the blood vessels of the kidney they are affected, it can lead to microalbuminuria or chronic renal failure. So these are the end organ damage. While most of the time the blood pressure, hypertension is asymptomatic, but when you have the measurement, when it is raised, we have to label the patient if it is raised above 140 systolic and above 90 millimeter of mercury diastolic. So we label them as hypertension. And there are other risk factors which are responsible for end organ damage other than hypertension. If comorbidities, that means these are the factors which are going to affect the end organ damage. Those are the smoking, hyperlipidemia, diabetes mellitus, stress. Excessive salt intake is very, very important. Increase or excessive intake of sodium and lack of exercise and the less potassium or calcium. Then also highly stressful conditions, personality makeup and race, genetic makeup, it runs in family, and then education and economic condition, environment conditions. Some of the professionals, they are stressful, where the possibility of hypertension is more. And more than 20% or 30% of the population is going to have at 40 years of age, but as the age progresses, the chances of hypertension increases. So by 60 years of age, 60 to 70% of the population is going to have hypertension. So we have to measure and we have to find out if it is possible. We should try to find out the cause, because hypertension is classified into two conditions: primary hypertension and secondary hypertension. Primary hypertension is also called essential hypertension. Essential because it was wrongly thought that the blood pressure elevation is essential for adequate perfusion of diseased tissues, but it is a wrong concept or thought. So, but it is primary in most of the 85 to 90% of the cases. We don't know the cause. So this type of hypertension is called as primary or essential hypertension. While where we know the cause, they are called as secondary hypertension, 10 to 15% of the cases, and they are usually correctable by surgery or by other measures. So if we can find out the cause, we should treat the cause, and then the hypertension will be permanently cured. Likewise, there is a renal artery constriction, saying one-sided renal artery is constricted, so that can give you secondary hypertension. Likewise, coarctation of aorta, that can lead to hypertension. Then pheochromocytoma, which is a tumor of the adenomedulla, that can give hypertension. Then Cushing disease and primary aldosteronism. So, and then drug-induced, like intake of corticosteroids or non-steroidal anti-inflammatory for other diseases like backache or osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis, that can lead to secondary hypertension. So when we know this and we have labeled, and just what you have already discussed, the physiology of hypertension, you know, the arterial blood pressure is directly depending upon the cardiac output and peripheral vascular resistance or arterial resistance. Cardiac output is depending upon the heart rate, force of contraction of the myocardium, and filling pressure, which is directly depending upon blood volume and venous tone. So all these factors, they are going to affect the peripheral the blood pressure. So we have to see all these things. So whenever we know, as far as the essential hypertension, which is the thing which we are going to discuss in detail, the factors which are affecting the essential hypertension or primary hypertension, mainly the genetic inheritance, because if there is family history, the possibility of having hypertension is more. Then psychological stress, maybe professional, like say for example, he is worked as a driver where permanently he is having stress, or he is working as a steno, or working with an officer which is short-tempered or giving him stress. And then environmental factors and dietary factors. Among the dietary factors, as I told you earlier, excessive intake of sodium or decreased intake of calcium and potassium, that is going to affect the hypertension. So we have to see all these things, and we have to record, and we have to see that these are the factors which are going to affect the hypertension. And when we have to treat, we have to see all these factors, and then we have to treat the cause, and we have to try to decrease the blood pressure, because decrease in blood pressure is going to affect the outcome, the morbidity as well as the mortality of the patient. So if we know that this is the cause and this is how we can reduce, so use of the drugs are drugs which are used, they are classified as, number one group is diuretics. Among the diuretics, as we have discussed in detail, diuretics, they are considered as number one group are drugs which can be used for the treatment of hypertension. Among the diuretics, thyroid and related agents, they are considered as number one drug to treat hypertension. So among the diuretics, thyroid diuretics, hydrochlorothiazide, chlorthalidone, etc. And if the hypertension is severe, then you have to use loop diuretics. Among the loop diuretics, furosemide, bumetanide, and ethacrylinic acid. These are example of loop diuretics. But if you are using in a case of congestive cardiac failure, where electrolyte may be very important, because that can, hypokalemia especially, can lead to arrhythmia. So then you have to give potassium sparing diuretics like triametrine, spironolactone, or amiloride. Then non-thiazide sulfonamide diuretics, indapamide, lozole, these are the diuretics which can be used for the treatment. Among the diuretics, the diuretics, they are going to increase the sodium loss, and along with sodium, the water. So that is going to decrease the blood pressure by decreasing the blood volume. Secondly, the loss of sodium, which is going to decrease the elasticity as well the neuronal activity of the arterioles. So that is going to decrease the blood volume, and we can use thiazide diuretics as single drug to start for the treatment of mild to moderate hypertension. Second group is sympatholytic drugs. Among these sympatholytic drugs, because they are going to control the tone, sympathetic tone of the arterioles as well as the venules, and these sympatholytic drugs, they are going to decrease the tone of the sympathetic nervous system, so they are going to decrease peripheral vascular resistance, as well as by the action on the heart, they are going to decrease the cardiac output, so they are beneficial. Among these, the centrally acting agents like methyl dopa, time-tested aldomet, very commonly used for the treatment of hypertension in patient of pregnant female. So, like second drug is clonidine, then gonabens and gonafacine. These are the centrally acting agents. Then the ganglion blocking agents, although they are clinically not commonly used, but trimethophan is still used for controlled hypertension. Then adrenergic neuron blocking agents, drugs like gonethidine, gonadril, rezarpine, old drug, methionine and debrasyquine. Then the beta adrenergic antagonists are beta blockers, non-selective, we have discussed already in detail, propranolol, nadolol, expranolol, timolol and pindolol with the trade names. And cardioselective are beta-1 selective blockers, metoprolol, acebutolol, atenolol, prectolol. Then alpha adrenergic antagonists are alpha blockers. Again, we have discussed in detail prazosin, doxazosine, trazosine. These are highly selective alpha-1 blockers. And phenoxybenzamine and phentolamine, and they are non-selective alpha blockers. Trazosine and doxazosine, they are selective alpha blockers. Then direct vasodilators, which are acting on the blood vessels, they decrease peripheral vascular resistance, and by decreasing peripheral vascular resistance, they can reduce blood pressure. So, according to the site, arterial vasodilators, hydralazine with the trade name of aprisosodine, minoxidil, lonitin, diazoxide, hyperstat with the trade name phenoldiprm, corlopam. Then arterial and venous dilator, nitroprusside, sodium nipride is the trade name. Then the venous dilators, nitrites and nitrates. The next group is calcium channel blockers, very important. They are going to block the calcium channels. So by blocking the calcium channel, they are going to decrease the peripheral vascular resistance, as well as their effects on the heart. They are going to decrease the force of contraction of the myocardium, as well as by decreasing the heart rate, especially verapamil and diltiazem. They are going to decrease the blood pressure. Verapamil, diltiazem, nifedipine, nicardipine, nimodipine, felodipine, isradipine, imlodipine, and many others. They are every day coming. After a few years, there is addition to this list. At least 4 or 5 names should be remembered by every student as far as the pharmacology is concerned. And then practically, inshallah, when you will be in practice, you will have a long list other than these 7-8 names. Then there are angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors or ACE inhibitors, captopril with the trade name of Capoten, enalapril, Vezotec, lisinopril, benazepril, fosinopril, quinapril, ramipril, moxipril, perindopril, trendopril. These are the ACE inhibitors which are, and every day the list is increasing. Next group is angiotensin 2 receptor blocker or ARBs, losartan with the trade name of Cozar and many other trade names, valsartan, Diavan, candesartan, Atacant, Aprasantan, Teventan, irbesartan, Vepro, olmesartan, Benicar, telmisartan, Micardus. These are ARBs, angiotensin 2 receptor blockers. And next group is renin inhibitors, and the latest drug which is now used is Eliskiren with the trade name of Tecturna. These are the important drugs which are commonly used either alone or in combination from different groups. Now we are going to discuss the different groups which are being used to treat hypertension. The first group is diuretics, which you have already discussed with Dr. Sidra in detail. And these diuretics, mainly they are decreasing the blood volume by causing excessive secretion of sodium along with water, and that decreases the blood volume. But when we are using diuretics for a prolonged period, the sodium which is being excreted, that decreases the stiffness of the blood vessels, also the neuronal reactivity of the blood vessel, that decreases the depletion of sodium. So that is also going to decrease the peripheral vascular resistance, but main mechanism is by decreasing the blood volume. So 10 to 15% or millimeter of 10 to 15 millimeter of mercury is decreased in blood pressure by use of diuretics in mild or moderate hypertension. So they are initially, to start with the treatment, they are the thiazide diuretics, they are drug of choice, but we have to consider the electrolyte, especially when we are using loop diuretics in moderate to severe hypertension along with other drugs. They are going to deplete sodium, which may cause weakness and other effects. So we have to consider the level of the potassium, which can give you very severe weakness as well as arrhythmia, if especially the patient is on when patient is on digitalis. So one has to be particular and one should get the electrolyte level being checked. So for that sake, we can use potassium sparing diuretics where there is a problem of arrhythmias or weakness with the diuretics. And then next group is sympathoplegic drugs, mainly the centrally acting agents, methyl-dopa, clonidine, gonabenzine, and gonoprazine. They are centrally acting sympathoplegic, as the name is indicating. Methyl-dopa, which is a alpha methyl 3,4-dihydroxyphenylalanine. It reduces sympathetic outflow from the vasomotor center in the brain stem, that is medulla. And methyl dopa is an analog of L-dopa and is converted to alpha methyl dopamine and alpha methyl norepinephrine. Both these metabolites are active and get bound tightly to alpha-2 adrenoreceptors, which are inhibitory in the neuron, the vasopressor center in the medulla, and they stimulate, which are located in presynaptic adrenergic neurons. So they are inhibitory, they decrease the release of norepinephrine onto the receptor side. Why they are called centrally acting? Because there are evidences that how they are, the alpha methyl norepinephrine or methyl dopamine, much lower doses of aldomet if given to decrease blood pressure in animals when the drug is administered centrally by cerebral interventricular injection rather than intravenous route. So that has shown that this is going to act at the vasomotor center. Secondly, alpha antagonists, especially alpha-2 administered centrally, they blocks the antihypertensive effect of methyl dopa. Thirdly, potent inhibitor of dopa decarboxylase administered centrally block antihypertensive effect of methyl dopa. That means the metabolism of methyl dopa is necessary for its activity. So these are the points which have shown that this methyl dopa is acting centrally as sympathoplegic by the section of alpha-2 receptor. This is going to decrease the further release of norepinephrine. Methyl dopa is very useful in mild to moderate hypertension. It is commonly used in pregnant women having hypertension because it's very safe and time-tested drug, and this drug is being used to lower blood pressure, and it is mainly acting to reduce the peripheral vascular resistance. Postural hypertension occurs in only volume-depleted patients. It also relaxes renal blood vessels. So this is a potential benefit of methyl dopa in those patients who have the problem of renal dysfunction. As far as the pharmacokinetics of methyl dopa is concerned, it is absorbed after oral administration. There is extensive first-pass metabolism in the gut mucosa as well as in the liver by O-sulfate conjugation. Bioavailability after oral administration is 25%. Two-thirds of the drug reaches systemic circulation and is excreted by kidney. Plasma half-life is 2 hours. Enter brain by pump, which transport amino acids. Effect of the oral dose is maximum in 4 to 6 hours and persists for 24 hours due to its metabolites along with parent drug as they separate from the plasma, but it is acting on the receptors. Dose of methyl dopa is 1 to 2 gram per day in divided doses. As far as the toxicity of methyl dopa is concerned, it produces sedation at the onset of the treatment. There is persistent mental lassitude on long-term use, impaired mental concentration, nightmares, mental depression, vertigo, extrapyramidal signs like tremors, rigidity, acidosis. On prolonged use, it can produce gynecomastia, it can promote lactation in men as well as in women due to increased prolactin secretion because there is inhibitory action on dopaminergic neurons in the hypothalamus. Very important is positive Coombs test. positive home test in 10 to 20% of the patient, which may be associated with hemolytic anemia, hepatitis or drug fever. When the drug is withdrawn, there is a prompt reversal of these abnormalities. It can also produce postural hypertension in volume depleted patients. Main clinical use is hypertension, mild to moderate, and in pregnant women. Next drug, clonidine, which is again a centrally acting sympathoplegic drug. It is partial agonist, centrally acting by alpha-2 receptors in the medulla, and this can be blocked by alpha blocker centrally. Clonidine sensitizes the brain stem pressure centers to inhibition by baroreflexes. They both bind tightly to alpha-2 methyl dopa and clonidine. They bind to alpha-2 receptors, so it is a sympathoplegic because it is alpha-2 receptor, they are inhibitory, so they decrease the release of norepinephrine. Difference in both clonidine lowers heart rate and cardiac output more than aldomate or methyl dopa. So that is the difference between clonidine and methyl dopa. Both have the same site of action, but main difference is that it is going to decrease the heart rate more as compared to. As far as the pharmacokinetics of clonidine is concerned, its absorption is good after oral administration. Bioavailability is 75% as compared to methyl dopa, which is 25%. Plasma half-life is 8 to 12 hours. Short half-life and its antihypertensive effects are more related to the plasma concentration. It is lipid soluble, so enter the brain readily from the circulation. Half of the drug is excreted unchanged in the urine. It can be applied as transdermal patch preparation, and this can reduce blood pressure for 7 days, but this patch can cause skin reaction. One has to be careful. As far as the toxicity of clonidine is concerned, it can produce dry mouth, which may be severe, and this is by center action, sedation, mental depression. While tricyclic antidepressant, they can block the antihypertensive effect of clonidine due to alpha receptor blocking action of tricyclic antidepressants. When clonidine is used for high dosage, sudden withdrawal can lead to hypertensive crisis due to increased sympathetic nervous activity. So what you have to do is it can produce this hypertensive crisis. So there is nervousness, tachycardia, headache and sweating. So drug should be stopped slowly rather than abruptly. Hypertensive crisis is if it is produced, you start the drug clonidine and then put the patient on alpha and beta blockers. Next are the adrenergic neuron blocking agents: vinethidine, Benadryl, Rezerpine, methadone, and debicepine. In this slide, this shows the mechanism action of vinethidine, how it is going to block the release of norepinephrine by its transport by the same mechanism which is transporting the vinethidine, and it is stored in the nerve vesicle, and this is going to block displaced from the vesicles, and that is going to deplete the norepinephrine. So on reach of action potential, there will be less release of norepinephrine, and that is going to decrease the blood pressure. This is the main mechanism, and the effect of guanethidine can be blocked by tricyclic antidepressant and cocaine, which are going to decrease the transport of guanethidine into the nerve vesicle. This is the main mechanism how guanethidine is going to act. As far as the pharmacokinetics of guanethidine are concerned, it is absorbed after oral administration. Bioavailability varies from 3 to 50%. 50% is cleared by kidney as metabolite. Plasma half-life is 5 days because it is stored in the nerve vesicle, so is retained in the nerve ending and other side, giving a very large volume of distribution. Because of long half-life, it is usually given once daily doses, and repeated doses will accumulate for 2 weeks to cause sympathoplegia, which lasts for same period after cessation of the therapy. Toxicity of guanethidine: it can cause postural hypertension, hypotension after exercise at high dosage. It is highly polar, cannot cross blood-brain barrier, so free from CNS effects. Excessive doses are too rapid. Increase in dose produce dangerously low blood pressure, which causes decreased blood flow to the heart and brain and can cause even shock. Delayed or retrograde ejaculation due to sympathoplegia. It can also produce diarrhea due to dominant parasympathetic activity. Hypertensive crisis in patient of pheochromocytoma. So one has to be careful when you are giving guanethidine. Drug interaction: tricyclic antidepressant, cocaine, they can antagonize the effect because they are going to inhibit the uptake of guanethidine at adrenergic terminals, while tyramine, amphetamines and rezapine, they release guanethidine from vesicle. Then the next group, beta adrenergic antagonists or beta blockers, both non-selective, for example propranolol, nadolol, expranolol, timolol and prindolisol, and cardioselective or beta-1 selective beta blockers like metoprolol, acebutolol, atenolol and paclitaxel. These beta blockers, when they are used in the treatment of hypertension, usually mild to moderate hypertension, can be controlled, and they are very safe, especially when the sympathetic activity is high. In younger age group, they can be used safely. Then in patient suffering from bronchial asthma, one has to be very careful. Our history of bronchoconstriction, because non-selective beta blocker, they can precipitate acute attack of bronchospasm. So one has to be very, very careful. Even these beta blockers, non-selective, when they are used in the treatment of glaucoma, a very small amount which is absorbed from the conjunctival sac, even that can precipitate the bronchospasm. So one has to be careful when using these beta blockers, especially non-selective, because they block both beta-1 and beta-2, and beta-2 they are in the bronchial smooth muscles, so that can cause bronchoconstriction. But you can use cardioselective in these patients. The mechanism how these beta blockers, they are going to lower blood pressure or hypertension, they can control hypertension is mainly by their action on the heart, by blocking the beta 1 receptors. They are going to decrease the cardiac output by decreasing the heart rate by their action on SA node and AV node. And conduction, they are going to decrease the heart rate, which is going to decrease the blood pressure. As far as the pharmacological effects of these beta blockers on blood vessel is concerned, because they block the beta receptors, which are vasodilators, so when they are blocked and the alpha receptor, they are free. So if you are asked the question, beta blockers, are they vasodilators? The answer is no, because truly speaking, they are vasoconstrictor. But when we are using them for the treatment of hypertension, beta blocker, they are going to decrease peripheral vascular resistance after prolonged use, because initially they cause the vasoconstriction, but when they are used for a prolonged period, by their action on number 1 vasomotor center, they decrease the peripheral vascular resistance by decreasing the sympathetic tone. Secondly, mainly by inhibiting the release of renin from the kidney, they decrease the conversion of angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1, which is converted to angiotensin 2, which is a strong vasoconstrictor. So by decreasing the conversion of angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1, they decrease the peripheral vascular resistance. Secondly, this angiotensin 2 is going to activate the aldosterone. So by these mechanisms, the beta blocker, they are useful in lowering the blood pressure, mainly by their action on the heart. Secondly, by their action on the renin, they are going to decrease the renin angiotensin aldosterone activity system. They decrease the peripheral vascular resistance. And thirdly, by decreasing that sympathetic tone. So they are practically, although they are a vasoconstrictor, but when they are used for prolonged period by those mechanisms through the kidney and by their action on the vasomotor center, they are going to decrease the peripheral vascular resistance. So they are useful in moderate to severe and mild to moderate hypertension. They can be used along with other drugs, especially with the treatment of with the direct vasodilator, because that vasodilatation is going to cause reflex tachycardia. To prevent this reflex tachycardia, beta blockers, they are very useful. They can be used safely with these vasodilators, as we know that they are going to increase salt and water retention. There is expansion of blood volume that can be antagonized by use of diuretics. So beta blocker, they are combined with beta blockers to decrease salt and water retention. And thirdly, when the patient is also having history of bronchoconstriction, the cardioselective or beta 1 selective blockers, they can be used, but one should be careful, because even those cardioselective, they can cause bronchoconstriction. Thirdly, when you are using beta blockers, one has to be careful, especially in young age, because they can disturb the sexual functions, and that can cause problem for the young people, young male patients. So one has to be careful. And thirdly, when the patient is having type 1 diabetes mellitus, which is insulin dependent diabetes, because that can cause prolonged hypoglycemia, as well as that can also mask the sign and symptoms of hypoglycemia, like tremors, anxiety, tachycardia, perspiration, which are the sign and symptom of hypoglycemia. If the patient is on beta blocker, all these symptoms will be masked. So patient will be in hypoglycemia, but he will not present with the typical symptoms of the hypoglycemia. So one has to be careful while prescribing these beta blockers to these insulin dependent diabetics. Also, when you are using beta blockers, one has to be careful not to use or combine beta blockers with calcium channel blockers, especially verapamil and diltiazem, because this combination can cause severe bradycardia or complete heart block. So one has to be careful while prescribing these two antihypertensive groups that the beta blockers should not be combined with calcium channel blockers, verapamil and diltiazem. Otherwise, he can go into complete heart block or severe bradycardia, and that may be problematic. The next group, alpha adrenergic antagonists or alpha blockers. As we had discussed already in detail, uses of alpha blockers. Academically, alpha blockers, they are very useful vasodilator because they, by blocking the alpha 1 receptor, which are vasoconstrictor, so these drugs, when they block alpha receptor, academically or theoretically, they should be very useful in decreasing the peripheral vascular resistance, which is going to decrease the blood pressure, but clinically they are not so important due to their side effects and their other the more efficient drugs in lowering the blood pressure. But these specific alpha 1 blockers, prazosin, trazodone, doxorubicin, they are very useful sometimes because by blocking alpha 1 receptors, when the alpha 2 receptor they are free, the problem of tachycardia, which is seen with these alpha non-selective phentolamine, tolazolene and phenoxybenzamine, with reflex tachycardia is very marked, but that is not, tachycardia is not seen with these alpha 1 selective blockers, prazosin, trazodone, doxorubicin. So they can be used clinically in the treatment, especially when the moderate to severe hypertension and when the patient is resistant to other drugs, and you can try these alpha blockers, or when the patient is having especially the problem of benign prostatic hyperplasia and he is having retention or symptoms of benign hyperplasia, we can use alpha blockers because this is going to decrease the outflow of obstruction, going to relieve the symptoms of benign hyperplasia of prostate, as well as is going to control blood pressure. So two diseases can be treated with one drug. So that is very useful. Likewise, the phenoxybenzamine and phentolamine and tolazolene, they are clinically used in the treatment of pheochromocytoma, which is a tumor of adrenal medulla. So hypertension as a result of this release epinephrine and norepinephrine from the adrenal medulla. So these drugs, phenoxybenzamine, phentolamine and prazosin, all these alpha blockers, they are very useful, especially the phenoxybenzamine because it is a long acting and it's permanently occupying the alpha receptors, both alpha 1 and alpha 2. So they are prescribed to start with and then followed by beta blockers. Otherwise, if you start beta blockers, that may be dangerous because alpha receptor they are free, and the norepinephrine and epinephrine which is released is going to act on alpha receptors which are free. They are going to, there will be hypertensive crisis. So one has to be very careful either to use phenoxybenzamine, phentolamine or these prazosin, which are all alpha adrenergic antagonists, and then subsequently you start beta blockers, or you start with those drugs which are blocking alpha and beta receptor simultaneously, like labetalol or carvedilol, which can block both receptors, so they can be used. Then comes the direct vasodilators. Among these vasodilators, arterial vasodilator like hydralazine with the trade name of apresolin, minoxidil, lonidine, diazoxide, hyperstat, pheneldoparm, corlopam. Arterial and venous dilators, nitroprusside sodium, nipride, and venous nitrites and nitrates. When we are discussing direct vasodilators, hydralazine and minoxidil, they are used orally, while sodium nitroprusside sodium and diazoxide and pheneldoparm, they are administered parenterally. As far as the mechanism of these drugs is concerned, hydralazine and nitroprusside, they are going to release nitrous oxide, which is going to activate guanylyl cyclase in the vascular smooth muscles, and that nitrous or an NO which is going to stimulate cyclic GMP or increase the synthesis of cyclic GMP will cause vasodilatation. It also, the nitrous oxide also causes aggregation or pillary aggregation, while minoxidil, diazoxide and hydralazine also causes ATP sensitive potassium channels that increase the permeability of the cell membrane to potassium, and this results in hyperpolarization of smooth muscle cells membrane. Hydralazine, when we are discussing hydralazine, it's a hydrazine moiety. It interferes with the mobilization of calcium as well. So this is an additional mechanism of hydralazine. It is a hydrazine derivatives. It dilates both the arterioles, not the veins. Phenomena of tachyphylaxis develop soon against this drug when you are using it as antihypertensive drug. It is used in severe hypertension. As far as the side effects are concerned with the hydrazine, this can cause headache, nausea, anorexia, palpitation due to vasodilatation, reflex tachycardia, sweating and flushing. Due to reflex tachycardia, it can cause precipitate acute attack of ischemic heart disease. And phenomena of lupus erythematosus, arthralgia, myalgia, which is presented with arthralgia, myalgia, skin rashes, is seen with hydralazine. As far as the pharmacokinetics is concerned, being the hydrazine, the population may be slow or fast acetylator. So on first pass metabolism is very extensive, and bioavailability due to this metabolism is double in slow acetylators. So one has to be very careful, and the dose is 40 to 200 milligram per day, twice a day. That give you how it can vary according to the status of the patient. If they are slow acetylator, one has to decrease the dose, and if they are fast acetylator, we have to increase the dose. while the diazoxide and minoxidil and hydralazine, they dilate arterioles only. So posterior hypertension does not occur with these drugs. Reflex sympathetic discharge occurs, which counteract its antihypertensive effects. So we can combine with beta blockers, or when there is a problem of salt and water retention, we can use diuretics. Salt and fluid retention is, although this is a thiazide compound, diazoxide, but it causes salt and water retention. So one can combine diuretics with diazoxide. Minoxidil is a potent stimulator of renin, while the nitroprusside sodium, it dilates both arterioles and veins. Nitroprusside is metabolized in the body into cyanide and thiocyanate, which are poisonous, and this can be prevented by giving sodium thiosulfate. It's a very useful drug, especially in hypertension emergency. All these vasodilators, they are used, but especially nitroprusside sodium immediately can decrease the blood pressure and can save the patient from complication of hypertensive emergency like stroke, brain hemorrhage, or heart failure. So we can prevent these complications by use of these drugs. Minoxidil can cause headache, sweating, hirsutism, which is particularly bothersome in women with minoxidil, but this increase in growth of hairs is very useful because it is used as to increase the growth of hairs in baldness, especially with the male. So because that is very disturbing to some, especially young people. So we can use minoxidil shampoo twice a week. That can increase the growth of the hairs in the head, as well as some females who are not pregnant or they are not in they are not married. They can use this shampoo to increase the growth of hairs and the fall of the hairs. So that is also an additional, although it's a side effect of the minoxidil, but can be utilized to increase the growth of the hairs for baldness or early fall of the hairs in female. But one should be careful not to use during pregnancy and also in child productive age, because that can cause teratogenic effect that can be dangerous for the newborn. Nitroprusside sodium, by activation of guanylyl cyclase, either directly or through release of NO, there is increased production of cyclic GMP, which can relax vascular smooth muscles of both arteries and veins. As far as the uses of these direct vasodilators are concerned, they are mainly used in long-term outpatient department therapy for severe hypertension, but can lead to tachycardia, fluid retention. So we have to be careful to stop these side effects. They are used mainly diazoxide and nitroprusside sodium and phenyldiphone. They are mainly used in hypertensive emergency. Also, they can be used in resistant or refractory congestive cardiac failure. Diazoxide is also useful in the treatment of insulinoma, which is a insulin secreting tumor of the pancreas or any other tissue from where the insulin is released. So to control, diazoxide can be used. Also, diazoxide relaxes the uterus, so labor may be stopped, but you can restart by using oxytocin. So these are additional uses of these direct vasodilators. Next group is calcium channel blockers, which are verapamil with the train of Calan, diltiazem, cardizem, nifedipine, Adalat, Nifedil, and many other trade names. Nicardipine, Cardine, Nimodipine, Nimotop, Felodipine, Plendril, Istradipine, Sanarcir, and very important, very commonly used amlodipine with the trade of Norvasc and many other trade names. Among these, verapamil chemically is phenylalkylamines, while diltiazem is benzothiazepine, while all others, starting from nifedipine up to amlodipine and others, they are dihydropyridines. So we can divide these calcium channel blockers into mainly dihydropyridine starting from nifedipine up to amlodipine, and non-dihydropyridines, although the verapamil is chemically phenylalkylamine while diltiazem is benzothiazepine, but they are non-dihydropyridines chemically. As far as the mechanism of action of these calcium channel blockers are concerned, mainly they inhibit calcium influx in the arterial smooth muscles. You can see in this diagram the calcium channel blocking effects, because this calcium, when it will enter the arterial smooth muscles, this is going to combine with calmodulin, and calcium calmodulin complex is formed, and that is going to activate myosin light chain kinase, which is going to cause activation of myosin light chain and this is going to cause contraction as a result of actin and myosin. So this is when you block the entry of calcium through these calcium channels, that means it is going to inhibit formation of calmodulin complex, and there is no activation of myosin light chain kinase, and so there will be smooth muscle relaxation. So this is the main mechanism how these calcium channel blockers, they direct peripheral arterial smooth muscles, and that they reduce the blood pressure. As far as the effect of these calcium channels are concerned, by vasodilatation, arterial vasodilatation, they also cause retention of fluid. They cause mild to moderate reflex tachycardia, especially the dihydropyridine group. They cause reflex tachycardia, while verapamil and diltiazem, they depress SA node to decrease heart rate. So reflex tachycardia is not significant with verapamil and diltiazem as it is with dihydropyridines, especially nifedipine. So you can, when there is a problem of bradycardia with these calcium channel blockers or beta blockers, when they are used and you have to use calcium channel blockers, you can choose either nifedipine or amlodipine or dihydropyridine group, which is not going to cause further decrease in heart rate. But when there is a problem of tachycardia, we can choose verapamil or diltiazem. So this is how, if you know the drugs, you can choose the best drug for that indication. As far as the side effects are concerned, the calcium channel blockers, they cause headache, flushing due to vasodilatation, dizziness, palpitation with dihydropyridine like nifedipine. Then very important is peripheral edema. Ankle edema is very common with these calcium channel blockers. Sometimes hypotension, especially with dihydropyridine group, is common. Then very important is constipation, especially with verapamil. And bradycardia is very common with diltiazem. So one has to be careful not to use beta blockers along with verapamil and diltiazem. Then arrhythmias or dysrhythmias, they can be seen with these calcium channel blockers. Nausea, vomiting and lethargy is also seen with. Activity is enhanced by addition of beta blockers, diuretics, ACE inhibitors, methyl dopa. So they can be used in combination with, but as I told you, a very important beta blocker not to be combined with diltiazem or verapamil. Important drug interactions. Verapamil increases plasma level of digoxin. Calcium blockers with quinidine cause excessive hypotension. And with beta blockers, AV block or heart failure is seen. So one should be very careful not to use this combination of beta blockers with verapamil and diltiazem. Then clinical uses, mainly they are used in the treatment of hypertension, mild to moderate and severe hypertension. Then as antiarrhythmics, especially verapamil and diltiazem. Then anti-anginals, the calcium channel blockers, they can be used as anti-anginal. Especially they are the drug of choice in case of vasospastic angina or Prince metal angina or atypical angina. Then cardiac arrhythmias, verapamil and diltiazem can be used in tachyarrhythmias. Then in Raynaud's disease, especially nifedipine and dihydropyridine group, they can be used for vascular vasospastic disease. Also they can be used in prevention of ischemic neurological damage following subarachnoid hemorrhage. And the drug which is clinically used is nimodipine. So to prevent ischemic neurological damage following subarachnoid hemorrhage, we can use nimodipine, very commonly used. Next group is angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors, ACE inhibitors. Captopril with the tritium capoten, enalapril, Vedotec, lisinopril, Zestril, benazepril, lotensin, fosinopril, monopril, conapril, acupril, ramipril, tritase, moxipril, Univesc, perindopril, Asion, and tendrolapil, Movic. These are ACE inhibitors which are commonly used, and they are every day the new ACE inhibitor, they are increasing the list of, at least you should remember 3-4 names among these. Captopril is among these ACE inhibitors. Captopril is the drug which is used in emergency treatment of hypertension, because all other ACE inhibitors, they are the pro-drugs in the body, they are metabolized and then they are going to act. That means they will take some time after its administration, they will take some time for its metabolism and then they will be effective. While captopril itself is going to be absorbed and it is going to act on the blood vessels, and it is going to cause dilatation of the blood vessel, and it is going to lower the blood pressure. So captopril nowadays is the drug of choice for emergency treatment. It is sublingually given or mucosal preparation. You put in the buccal cavity from where it is absorbed, and shortly within minutes it is going to lower the blood pressure. While all others ACE inhibitor also they are the same group, but their effect will take longer time, maybe 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours. So you cannot wait for so long. So this is the only drug which is used for emergency treatment. This shows the mechanism action, the site where ACE inhibitor, they are going to block the conversion of angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2. We know that angiotensinogen, under the effect of renin, which is released from the juxtaglomerular apparatus under the effect of beta 1 receptor stimulation, this renin is going to convert angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1, which is hydrolyzed by this enzyme peptidyl dipeptidase, or converting enzyme to angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. The peptidyl dipeptidase or kinase 2, this is going to convert angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2, and angiotensin 2 is a strong vasoconstrictor. So this is going to cause vasoconstriction. So if you block this conversion from angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2, that means this strong vasoconstrictor will not be synthesized. So this will cause vasodilatation. Secondly, this angiotensin is going to release aldosterone, which is going to increase sodium and water retention. So if you decrease the synthesis of angiotensin 2, that means the release of aldosterone will decrease and there will be less retention of sodium and water. So there is less increase in blood volume. Thirdly, this converting enzyme or kinase enzyme is also degrading bradykinin. In kininogen on the other side, you see the kininogen is converted to bradykinin, and this is metabolized and inactivated by this converting enzyme or kinase enzyme or peptidase enzyme. So when this is blocked, this enzyme is blocked, that means the degradation of bradykinin will stop. And this bradykinin directly or through release of increased synthesis of prostaglandin is going to cause vasodilatation. And this vasodilatation will decrease peripheral vascular resistance and will decrease blood pressure. So this enzyme inhibition, ACE inhibitors, they are mainly by this decreasing the conversion of angiotensin to angiotensin 2. Secondly, by decreasing the metabolism of bradykinin, which is directly or through increased synthesis of prostaglandin, will cause vasodilatation. So all these factors. And thirdly, decrease release of synthesis of aldosterone, so they will decrease the salt and water retention. So all these factors, they are going to cause decrease in blood pressure. These ACE inhibitors, they will lower the peripheral vascular resistance, while cardiac output and heart rate is not significantly changed. They don't cause reflex sympathetic activation. So safe in ischemic heart disease and in treating congestive cardiac failure. And they are very useful in patients with diabetes where there is a nephropathy, because these ACE inhibitor, they are very useful drug of choice when patient is also having diabetes mellitus and there is involvement or dysfunctioning of the kidneys. As far as the pharmacokinetics is concerned, captopril, it is readily absorbed after oral administration. Bioavailability is 70% when fasting, but if taken with food, it decreases to 30 to 40%. Metabolized to disulfide conjugates, less than half of the oral dose is excreted unchanged in the urine. It is distributed to most body tissues except CNS. plasma half-life of captopril is 3 hours, excreted by the kidney, so the dose is reduced in renal insufficiency. But as I told you earlier, that captopril can be absorbed when it is given sublingually or through the buccal mucosa, and it can directly go to the systemic circulation, and it is going to act on the blood vessel, and it is very useful in lowering blood pressure in emergency. While all other ACE inhibitors, they are prodrugs, so they have to be metabolized in the body to show their effects. Like enalapril is a prodrug in the body. It is converted to enalaprylate, which is also available as injection form. Enalaprylate, which is an active drug in the body. So that means all ACE inhibitors, they are clinically used by oral route and by other routes, but they are going to be activated in the body to show their effects. The dose of captopril or Capoten is 25 to 50 milligram sublingually, twice a day or thrice a day. Before food you have to give, while the dose of enalapril is 10 to 20 milligram per day, once daily or twice a day. Lisinopril is 10 to 80 milligram per day, once daily. As far as the toxicity of these ACE inhibitors are concerned, they can produce severe hypotension, especially in hypovolemic patients, which may be due to diuretics or salt restriction, or there is a GIT disturbance, diarrhea, which can cause precipitate or can cause severe hypertension. Then acute renal failure, especially in bilateral renal artery stenosis. Then hyperkalemia, more likely in diabetics and renal insufficiency. Then as a result of decreased degradation of bradykinin, a substance P, these ACE inhibitors can cause angioedema or dry cough. Dry cough is very common with these ACE inhibitors, which can be accompanied by wheezing. So one has to be careful. If the patient gives you history of coughing as a result of administration of ACE inhibitor, you have to change. Then also you can have neutropenia, pancytopenia, proteinuria. Then minor adverse effects like altered sense of taste, allergic skin reactions, drug fever, more with captopril. These drug ACE inhibitors, they have teratogenic risk, so they should not be administered during first trimester, while during pregnancy, second and third trimester, they are also contraindicated because of fetal hypotension, anuria, and fetal abnormalities, even up to death is recorded with these ACE inhibitors, so they should not be used during hypertension during pregnancy. Then very important drug interactions, potassium sparing diuretics or potassium supplements result in hyperkalemia, because these ACE inhibitors, they cause retention of potassium. So if you give potassium supplement or potassium sparing diuretics, that can cause hyperkalemia. Then use of NSAIDs can block the bradykinin mediated vasodilatation and will impair the hypotensive effect of ACE inhibitor. So whenever you have to give NSAIDs along with ACE inhibitor, you should have to increase the dose of these ACE inhibitors, otherwise there will be failure of the control of hypertension. Then clinical uses of these ACE inhibitors, you can use in hypertension, cardiac failure, falling myocardial infarction, when there is vascular dysfunction. Then very important, as I told you, diabetic nephropathy. They are very useful in diabetic nephropathy. Then also progressive renal insufficiency, you can use these ACE inhibitors. Then ARBs are angiotensin II receptor blockers. Next group is angiotensin II receptor blockers. Losartan with the trade name of Cozar, Valsartan, Navan, Candesartan, Atacant, Eprosartan, Tevetan, Elbirsartan, Avapro, Olmesartan, Benicar, Telmisartan, Micardis. These are angiotensin II receptor blockers. As we have seen already that angiotensin II is a strong vasoconstrictor. So these drugs, they are acting at a step where the ACE inhibitors, they are producing angiotensin II by inhibiting the ACE, the angiotensin converting enzyme. But these drugs, they are not having any effect on the degradation of bradykinin. So chances of angioedema as well as the chances of wheezing and bronchoconstriction is not seen with these angiotensin receptor blockers. Secondly, these are going to block the angiotensin II receptors. So angiotensin II, which is synthesized by other enzymes other than ACE inhibitors or peptide dipeptidase enzyme in other tissues, which is released from those tissues and is going to act on these receptors, they will be, because the receptor they are blocked, so they will be more effective as compared to ACE inhibitors, because they are blocking the receptors, angiotensin II receptors. So they are good drugs as they are going to block not only this synthesis of angiotensin II from by this, but they are also going to block the receptors where they said angiotensin II has to act. Secondly, chances of wheezing and bronchoconstriction, coughing, dry cough are less with ACE, the ARBs are angiotensin II receptor blockers. So, but they have the same efficacy as ACE inhibitors used for the lowering of blood pressure, also in diabetic nephropathy, hypertension, and they have the most the side effects. They are like ACE inhibitors. They are not safe in during pregnancy. So all those, they are the same, but they are better in patients with history of bronchoconstriction or coughing or angioedema, because of the possibility they are not going to inhibit the enzyme. So these ACE, the ARBs, they are common use for treatment of hypertension. Also they are used in the treatment of congestive cardiac failure, in diabetic nephropathy along with hypertension. They are used. Then comes renin inhibitors. Aliskiren is a new drug. It is going to, it's a selective renin inhibitor. Aliskiren is available for treatment of hypertension. It directly inhibits renin and thus act earlier in angiotensin, renin-angiotensin aldosterone system than ACE inhibitors or ARBs. So it lowers blood pressure about as effective as ARBs, ACE inhibitors and thiazide diuretics. Aliskiren should not be used routinely combined with ACE inhibitors or ARBs. Side effects: aliskiren can cause diarrhea, especially at high doses, and can also cause cough and angioedema, but probably less than ACE inhibitors. As with ACE inhibitors and ARBs, aliskiren is contraindicated during pregnancy, and this aliskiren is metabolized by liver enzymes and is also subject to many drug interactions. And then when you are treating a case of hypertension, you have to consider to combine 2, 3, 4 drugs. It's better to take one drug from one group and second drug from the group which is going to antagonize or to counteract the side effect of the first group, and all the polytherapy for hypertension should contain diuretics, maybe mostly thiazide diuretics, but if there is severe hypertension then you can use loop diuretics. But loop diuretics, they are dangerous because they cause hypokalemia. So you have to, especially if the patient is on digoxin, which can cause severe arrhythmias, one has to check the electrolyte balance. So this is how you treat hypertension, because hypertension, if it is not controlled, is going to increase the morbidity as well as the mortality, as there is a rise in the severity of the morbidity and mortality by increasing the when the blood, there is rise in blood pressure, that increases to many times. So one has to lower the blood pressure, because that is going to decrease the chances of the complication of end organ damage. So this is how you, by these drugs, you treat the patient with hypertension.